Everyone, I'm Donna Martinez. Welcome once again to another edition of Shaftesbury Society. We're coming to you live from the headquarters of the John Locke Foundation here in Midtown Raleigh. Hope you are doing well on this Monday. Boy, do we have a great conversation to bring to you today. Yet another one. I know I say this every week, but boy, I've been looking forward to this for a couple of months now. How could you possibly forget what happened in North Carolina in Bladen County back in 2018 when voting shenanigans in a congressional race there drew national attention to North Carolina, and it also drew a spotlight on issues of voter fraud and election integrity. It ended up in the ordering of a new election in the 9th Congressional District, which ended up being won by Republican Dan Bishop. He defeated Democrat Dan McCready in that race. Well, there is a brand new book, and I mean brand new. Official publication date actually is tomorrow, but you can get it today. We have the authors with us today. Glad to have them with us. We're going to be talking about the book titled The Vote Collectors, and a fascinating subtitle as well, The True Story of the Scamsters, Politicians, and Preachers Behind the Nation's Greatest Election Fraud. The authors joining us today are two folks that you probably have heard of because they have reputations on reporting here in North Carolina. Nick Oxner is the chief investigative reporter at WBTV Charlotte, and Michael Graff is the editor of Axios Charlotte. They are the co-authors of The Vote Collectors. Also joining me is my Locke Foundation colleague. He's an expert in election law and election integrity, Dr. Andy Jackson. Gentlemen, welcome. Thanks for being with us here at Shaftesbury Society.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you. This is exciting.
We are going to start this conversation today about this new book, The Vote Collectors. We're going to take you back to election night, the second election. Andy, if you would share your screen, let's bring people up to date on how this whole story ended, at least sort of ended.
Okay, and let's get this up.
Here at the Dan Bishop rally where, believe it or not, Dan Bishop just took the stage with President Donald Trump on speakerphone. Let's zoom in and show you just a second of what's going on here.
I want to congratulate all of you for being his friends and helping, and I want to say hello to his wife and family as they stood tall. And what he did tonight is monumental. The comeback he made and the way he handled the pressure of that was great. And it was an honor to be with you. And I'll tell you what, we had some time last night. That was a good indication of what was going to happen. So thank you all and congratulations. And you got a great man in there, a great man.
There you go. That was President Donald Trump on speakerphone here at the Dan Bishop rally in Monroe. Of course, Dan Bishop declared the winner about 45 minutes ago. If you could hear the president, he said that Dan Bishop can handle pressure the way professional athletes can handle pressure. He then referenced his rally last night in Fayetteville. Of course, Trump already tweeted within the last half hour that a couple weeks ago, Bishop was down in this race by double digits and said that because of the work of him and Vice President Mike Pence, who was also here yesterday, as the reason Bishop could claim victory tonight. Guys, back to you.
So, Nick, what is it like as you take a look at that clip, looking once again at the results of that special election? Help us understand what's on your mind as you watch that.
I'd actually forgotten all about that. So I was glad. Not that Trump called in, but that clip that he called in while we were on live TV. Yeah. How fortuitous. You know, that night capped in some ways served as the end of a long, almost year fallout after the 9th Congressional District scandal erupted in late November of 2018. Of course, the real end will be if and when McCrae Dowless ever go. I'm sure we'll talk about him a lot today. But if McCrae Dowless ever gets to trial, you know, just a couple hours ago, he pleaded not guilty in a Wake County courtroom and now has a court date of October 26th for his trial to begin, or August 26th of next year for his trial to begin. But when I watched that clip specifically, that is the closest thing right now we have to any kind of closure in the 9th Congressional District scandal, which you can read in the book is a crazy tale in and of itself.
Oh, it is. And I have to tell folks that I would encourage you to get this book. And I think, actually, Nick, you have a copy hot off the presses there behind you. Go ahead and show that I would encourage folks to get this book because it reads like a fiction novel, but it's not fiction. It is nonfiction of exactly what happened. It's a great read, very interesting story. So I would encourage you all to do that. Michael, tell us about that election night. What are you thinking of when you watch that clip of Nick reporting the results of that special election? What were you doing?
I was at Dan McCready's rally. So Nick was at one rally and I was at the other rally, and we were texting back and forth. What's it like there? What's going on there? And Nick, I remember texting me saying, "Hey, there's fireworks here, pyrotechnics going off here, and stuff like that." I just remember that specifically. But so I had a totally different. There was a different feeling in the room I was in. I'll say that. There was not a lot
Dan
happening.
McCready, he lost twice in this this whole thing.
Yeah. And that was the official wrap on his 19 months of campaigning, or 20 some months of campaigning, or whatever he did, because he ran twice. So it was a totally different set of emotions where I was, but it was always also fun to download with Nick afterward to like compare the two things, which is kind of like the story of this book. Or how Nick and I reported this book. We would go report things, Nick especially. He would run to Bladen County, or I would run to Bladen County, and we'd talk to people and we'd say, "Can you believe this happened?" And then we'd just, we'd have to like call each other afterward to like confirm what we just saw and make sure we got it down so that the other person heard it. So that's kind of what that night was like. Just like every other night, we were reporting the book, essentially, just with higher stakes, I guess.
It started, well, publicly, it started on November 6, 2018, when Republican Mark Harris actually defeated Democrat Dan McCready in the official election, and Harris had won by about 2%. But explain to us all, refresh our memory as to how and when allegations of fraud actually emerged in that race, which eventually led to that special election.
Yeah, it started kind of out of the blue later that month at the end of November, when the State Board of Elections met to certify the results of the 2018 election. That is a very routine thing. It happens every election, and normally no news is made out of it. I don't even think very many people were paying attention to that meeting that day in terms of journalists. I don't even think there were a lot of journalists in the room when they made this decision. And kind of unexpectedly, a guy named Joshua Malcolm, who at the time was the vice chairman of the State Board of Elections, a Democrat, made a motion to not certify the results of the 9th Congressional District. And he did it in a way that didn't have any specific details that day, didn't really know why. We just knew that this was happening. And Malcolm said he was aware of a lot of, I think the word was, unfortunate activities in his neck of the woods. Malcolm's from Robeson County, right next door to Bladen County. And it seemed to even really catch the fellow board members by surprise in the room, just looking at their body language from that day. And they met in closed session after that, and then they voted eventually to not certify the results of the 9th Congressional District race. And that is the starting point for what turned out to be about 3-month sprint between then and the State Board of Elections hearing into the 9th Congressional District matter that happened in mid-February of 2019.
Did it turn out that Mr. Lawson actually had conversations with Dan McCready, who lost that race? Is that how the information even made its way over to the Board of Elections, or was there other stuff going on behind the scenes?
The Board of Elections had been looking into Bladen County for years, and especially after the 2016 election, the State Board of Elections had referred both McCrae Dallas and his political operation and a Black political action committee known as the Bladen County Improvement Association to federal prosecutors and to state prosecutors. That being said, we know because I have the phone records. We know that there were conversations between Joshua Malcolm, the vice chairman of the State Board of Elections that made the motion to not certify the race, and Dan McCready, the Democrat candidate who had just lost to Mark Harris, in the days between the election and the State Board meeting. We don't know what they said or what the conversations were about still, because neither man in that conversation has told us. And Joshua Malcolm has refused to produce text messages for years, despite an ongoing lawsuit from me and WBTV trying to obtain those records. But we do know that they had conversation leading up to that.
So, Michael, can you help us understand exactly what is legal and what is illegal in North Carolina? We keep hearing the phrase ballot harvesting. What is it that was alleged and which actually turned out to be, true?
Well, what is strictly, I mean, and the basic, the very clear thing that's illegal is you can't take somebody's ballot. So if you are running an operation where you are trying to get out the vote, and you stand at that person's front door and they fill out their absentee ballot, you are not allowed to take it and carry it to, unless you're a close relative or meet a certain number of standards. You're not allowed to carry it to the mailbox, to the voting center. You're not allowed to carry it anywhere and turn it in. So that's like the clearest thing, and that's what the center of all of this investigation is, and that's where the murkiness comes in. Is did anybody in McRae Dallas's operation or in the Bladen Improvement Association actually handle ballots in 2018? And that was the big question that drove a lot of this investigation. And that's the thing that investigators have been trying to prove for years in Bladen County.
For real quick, there was actually another front going on as far as information coming in. This was kind of outside what was going on with the Board of Elections, in that there were people that were observing the data coming in on election night. And I think chief among them was Michael Bitzer. He's a political science professor at Catawba College. There were others as well that saw how unusually large the absentee ballot returns were in Bladen County. And that was kind of a first flag that was going up for kind of outside observers that, had no idea of the physical activities that were going on in Bladen. They just knew that it was highly unusual. And I think that started feeding ammunition to people that were calling for folks to look at this election and maybe not certify it.
What was more unusual, I think, was just the ratio of like the overall vote in that county versus the number of votes for a certain candidate in that county. So, I mean, I think that was what the highly unusual thing was. Yeah.
And then two, the number of requested ballots versus the number of returned absentee ballots, also kind of a red flag. There was speculation and concern for a long time that McRae Dallas's operation was collecting ballots and throwing them in the trash. It's worth pointing out that more than a year later, former director of the State Board of Elections, Kim Strack, said they've never found any evidence of that happening. But that certainly was one of the flags. But it's worth keeping in mind, too, that people have been voting by absentee in Bladen County and Robeson County and Columbus County for a very, very, very long time. And so, it makes you wonder, what about 2018 was the lightning rod that made people really dig into it as opposed to previous years?
Exactly.
Because all these red flags existed to one extent or another before that.
Exactly, and that's why I asked you about that, because you both write in the book about those conversations that apparently occurred between Mr. Malcolm and Dan McCready. But Nick, did you say that you and WBT TV have actually been trying to get those records, but you have been stymied?
Yeah, I mean, we only know that those conversations existed at all because my TV station that I work at filed a public records lawsuit against UNC Pembroke, where Josh Malcolm worked in his day job, and issued him a cell phone that he used as his both work phone and personal phone to get his phone records. That being said, we've never actually seen the contents of any of his text messages, even though those would also be public records. We don't know where the phone is, and we've never been able to access any additional records. That lawsuit remains outstanding, and we continue to try to get more records.
That's pretty fascinating, because my recollection from the book is that this was not just perhaps an acquaintance calling an acquaintance and saying, gee, I lost the race, and the person saying, I'm sorry you lost the race. These were multiple conversations of some length.
Yeah, I mean, they certainly weren't just 2 or 3 minute conversations. There were certainly more than one of them. Again, we don't know what they said. I'd like to know what they said. I'd like for Josh Malcolm to produce all his text messages like he's required to by law, but he hasn't. And maybe one day we'll get to the point where that happens.
Yeah, very interesting. Okay, so on that initial election night, so Republican Mark Harris wins the race by about 2%. And interesting how you chronicle in the book that he and his team seemed to be really late to the party in terms of figuring out that there were even questions about this. He headed up to Washington, D.C. for freshman orientation. Take us to that part of the story.
Yeah, I mean, he was pretty happy. I'll say that. Mark definitely wanted to win this race. I mean, he's made it very clear. If you there's one picture of him when he got assigned his room, the room assignments or office assignment celebration or ceremony that they have in Washington, where you draw numbers out of a hat, and basically, closer you are to number one, the better the office is. The closer you are to number 300 or whatever the closer you are to I guess the basement. And he drew a really bad number, and there's this look on his face, just a pain look, but he's also really smiling, and you can tell he really was happy. I mean, he was just thrilled to have this, and then to have it, then to sort of lose it overnight. He was very upset about it. He still is very upset about it. He still feels pretty burned about it. His wife wrote her own book about this, what did he know before then, though? I mean, it did come out in the hearing, obviously, that his son had warned him about using McCrae Dallas. So that's sort of another driving question of our book. Is another driving question for a lot of people is, how much did Mark Harris know? We do think that Mark Harris believes he was the victim in this story. That's for sure. But most of the people in this story, from all sides of it, believe they were the victim in this story too. So that's another. It's more complicated than black and white, a Republican and Democrat. I hope that people get that when they come through the book, because it has a lot to do with integrity. It has a lot to do with the stories people are willing to tell themselves about themselves. And that's kind of the story of our book, I believe.
I thought it was very interesting as I was reading the book. And again, folks, we're talking about this book, very new, hot off the press. It's called The Vote Collectors. It's written by our guests, Michael Graff and Nick Oxner, about what happened in Bladen County in 2018. Not only a huge story for North Carolina that results in a new election that ends up being won by Republican Dan Bishop over Democrat Dan McCready, but it also brought all sorts of national news media scrutiny, not only to North Carolina, where we're sort of used to it in terms of elections, but specifically to Bladen County, particular people, and the lifestyle, heritage, and culture of the South. And they write about this in the book. Now, if you're interested in the book, official publication date is tomorrow, but you actually can get it now. It is published by UNC Press. There's a link to the book in the comments section of our Facebook page if you're watching us that way, but also wherever you normally buy your books, whether it's a printed book or an ebook, just go there and you can find it, The Vote Collectors. The national attention that came to North Carolina ended up really almost in a caricature of the South and of Bladen County. And I thought you wrote a really interesting commentary about what occurred. Help us understand what the national news media, the perspective they brought to this story.
Well, I think it's frankly natural for anyone who's not from Bladen County to get to Bladen County and realize, wow, this place isn't like where I'm from. As anyone knows from southeastern North Carolina, it's a special place, and it can be a little different place. I say that as someone who grew up in Hope Mills, 30 minutes from Bladen County. And if you put me down in Bladen County, I sound a lot different than I do right now because my twang starts coming out, whether I wanted to or not. And so I think it is really easy for a reporter to come from New York or DC, or, there are folks from all over the world that descended on Bladen County, and to get here and think, well, these people just, talk funny and, are still a lot of them are still smoking, and, a lot of them are still operating on paper and pencil, to do their election stuff. That's how McCrae Dallas ran his operation. And it's easy to dismiss them at their own peril. I mean, I think maybe we've all learned the hard way growing up a time or two that people who want you to think they're dumb country boys, as McCrae Dallas refers to himself, are actually very smart people and very observant people. And I think in a lot of ways, that's what fueled what we saw play out between McCrae and the Bladen County Improvement Association, is people who, intelligent enough to run actually sophisticated operations, even though they're running it in kind of an unsophisticated way. And people who, the stakes to them were very important, very vital, because they're talking about control of their community. And that's what they viewed this as.
And help us understand that relationship between McCrae Dallas and the Improvement Association, and actually what they did. How did this operation work? What came out at the hearing about how it worked?
Well, McCrae got his start in politics as a matter of revenge. He wanted to send the district attorney who had sent him to jail. He wanted to get him out of office. So he started to work in elections then. At the time, he was working for the Bladen Improvement Association. McCrae learned how to run an operation with the Bladen Improvement Association. They had either a bad breakup, or McCrae saw more opportunity working for the Republican side in Bladen County around about 2010. But he started, he learned how to do what he did from them. And that's another interesting part of the story, is because folks on both sides of this are very similar. If the leaders of both of these operations are very similar, and I don't think they realize how similar they are because they're at odds all the time. But one of the things we found out was just how wildly like each other they are. The whole point is McCrae keeps a list, an updated list, or gets an updated list of voter registrations and voter rolls, and he knows exactly where people live. He knows who they're likely to vote for. He knows who he thinks he can get on his side. He's sure to knock on their door, or he's sure to have somebody knock on their door, and at the very least remind them that there's an election coming up. And at the very least, remind them that, you can get this absentee ballot. You should go ahead and request that absentee request form. And just be sure to do that. And then the question becomes, how close do they get after that request form comes back, and after that ballot gets back to the voter? And that's been the question in Bladen County since the 1990s. How close do these operations get to it? How far? When do they go over the line, and how often do they go over the line, and how many votes does that include?
Yeah, that's the fascinating thing, because your description, Michael, some people might say, well, that sounds like a kind of a classic get out the vote operation to me. You remind people, hey, we want you to vote, and you can get an absentee ballot. Where does it cross the line to become illegal?
Well, it's really interesting. When I remember in the first weeks down on the ground there, and I'm talking to McCrae, and I'm in his office, and he's showing me all his files and documents, and I'm kind of getting a look at what he does. I remember thinking to myself at one point, I mean, if you're in Washington, D.C., he'd be able to charge hundreds of thousands of dollars for this. It's actually a fairly sophisticated get out the vote operation that he operates, at one of two tables in one of two wood paneled smoky rooms, right? By paper and pencil, seriously. And so the question becomes, do they collect people's ballots? It can also, you asked earlier, what is the possible fraud? It could also be if you have people signing as a witness who didn't actually witness the voter fill out the ballot. That could be illegal. And there is evidence to suggest that people who worked for McCrae and people who worked for the Improvement PAC both witnessed ballots, signed as witnesses on ballots in the 2018 election that they didn't actually witness. One of the most interesting stories that we found on the ground in 2018 was my colleague David Hodges, who works with me at WBTV, actually uncovered a complaint. I think it was from the 2014 election, maybe 2016, where a voter called the Bladen County Board of Elections and filed a complaint because nobody from the Improvement Association came by to pick up his ballot that year. So, so it is such a normal, I take that to mean that is how people voted in Bladen County. It's likely against the law, and we can talk about whether it's illegal or not, but that is what people were used to. And so the first time I met McCrae Dallas in his driveway, I stuck out my hand to shake his, and I said, I don't know what you've done or haven't done, but I know you're not the only person doing it. And I think that has proven to be true over time.
Fascinating. So what was it that led then to the call from the Board of Elections to have a special election? And how did Dan McCready and Mark Harris find out about this?
Well, Mark Harris called for it himself, essentially. Mark Harris took the stand in the hearing in February of 2019. After there was, he got caught essentially in either he says he misspoke or he misremembered, I think is how he put it. But he got caught in conflicting statements where he and his son, eventually his son took the stand and said that he had warned his father about McCrae Dallas's operation. So there were several things that, pressure was mounting on Mark. And then one day he said, I think that there should be a new election in the 9th Congressional District. He closed it, and it was sort of this emotional moment. There was a little audible gasp in the room. People started running out to send notes to their editors back in DC and New York. I mean, it was a huge moment in North Carolina politics. And this was the day after his son took the stand to say, with his passionate speech, we've got to do better than this. So that's how it happened. I mean, the hearing led to the result that we had a new election. And within a week or two, there were 12 candidates for the Republican primary, 12 candidates in the Republican primary. And it was kind of the wild, wild west. And Dan Bishop came out of that primary and then won the general election. And
Mark Harris said, no, he wasn't going to go back into it.
Yeah, it's actually interesting. We spoke with Mark and Beth Harris for the book. And when we interviewed them, Mark played for us a voicemail from Dan McCready. Dan McCready called him and asked him if he was going to take another shot at it. Essentially, he was asking more specifically about whether or not he was going to challenge in court this notion that people who'd not run in the first election, meaning him and Mark Harris and Dan McCready, would be able to be on the ballot. It was really interesting to hear that, and it sounds about as awkward and uncomfortable as you might think it would.
Exactly.
But there was some speculation on whether or not Mark would run again. There was speculation on whether other people not named Mark Harris could run as a Republican. Of course, we ultimately know they could, and Dan Bishop did and won. So that was an interesting time.
The hearing, so many interesting personalities emerged at the hearing, and then with Mark Harris's son ending up giving some testimony that was very emotional. You have to wonder, was there a family fracture there between Mark Harris and there are actually two sons that were involved, but one testifying?
We asked them that. Yeah, we asked them that, and Mark puts it as, we've had a family that has been able to have lively discussions over meals my entire life. Is kind of how he puts it. He likes to say he's open to his kids speaking their mind, and they've had that dynamic since they were kids. Was there added tension after that? Yeah, I would say so. Nick knows a little bit better than I do, but yeah, there was.
Well, and at the same time, the evening of John Harris's testimony, I don't know that it was you would say it was against his father, but it certainly wasn't helpful to his father.
And it felt like a private conversation that they should have been having, not in a public setting. I mean, it was father and son, and it just felt almost, I guess I felt like I was looking in on something that perhaps I shouldn't be hearing in some ways. To me, it was that personal.
Sure, although that's what happens when subpoenas are involved, I suppose, right? And John Harris is an attorney at the time and still is working at the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Eastern District of North Carolina, not connected in any way to the investigation into this case, we should say. And I think he was obligated to produce those emails, or certainly felt like he was obligated to produce those emails, which led to his testimony to the state board. But what was interesting to me is the night after John Harris testified, the lawyer for Mark Harris told me that Mark texted John and said that he was proud of him. And so I'm sure he had a lot of other feelings and emotions, but, I think a father watching his son do what his son thinks is the right and noble thing, that's got to be rewarding of its own kind.
Interesting. The other thing about the hearing was that we had people who were called to testify to kind of explain what they did. And Help us understand one or two of those people, particularly one that ends up being, I believe it's the stepdaughter of McCrae Dallas, who is central to this whole story, and what she had to say about the role she played, and then how she was portrayed by the press.
Yeah, so yeah, a woman named Lisa Britt is ostensibly a stepdaughter of McCrae, views McCrae as a father figure. And she was the first witness called by the State Board of Elections at the hearing. She's the first person on the stand. And what she ended up testifying about, in large part, or at least off the very top, was an interview she did with me in the weeks immediately following the race not being certified. I was the only person to talk with her on camera, on the record, right after that. And the State Board of Elections was very interested in what she had to tell me because it was very different than what she had told the State Board of Elections. And I can say all this publicly now because obviously McCrae has agreed to cooperate as a source with me. At the time of both the hearing and that interview, McCrae was a confidential source. I had an agreement with him that I'd not reveal him as a source, and so I couldn't talk publicly about this, but I can now. And so I interviewed Lisa Britt in McCrae Dallas's kitchen. He was in the room because she asked for him to be in the room. And she had called me and told me that she wanted to do an interview that day. And I asked where, and she said she wanted to do it at McCrae Dallas's house. And that all what I just said is very different than what she testified to. And she painted this picture on the stand under oath that she had showed up at McCrae's house, was surprised to do an interview, was surprised to have McCrae in the room, and basically painted this picture of doing that interview with me under duress, which again is not what happened. So that set the tone for the whole rest of the week and the whole rest of the hearing. We get in the book, we get into a little bit about the steps she went over with the state board employees and investigators reviewing her testimony the night before. And I think she has some feelings about her relationship to the state board and its chief investigator, Joan Fleming.
And this, folks, what you're hearing, the description here, this is why I think I referenced at the top of this Shaftesbury Society that this book is nonfiction. It is a factual recounting of what occurred, but it reads like a novel, from the characters who are involved to the intrigue behind the scenes and the conflict that occurs. The book we're talking about is called The Vote Collectors, officially being published tomorrow by UNC Press. We're talking with the authors, Nick Oxner and Michael Graff. Gentlemen, before we bring my colleague Andy Jackson more into the conversation, give us an update on where three people who are key to this story are today. First of all, McCrae Dallas.
Well, McCrae was in court today. He literally called about 10 minutes ago while we've been doing this, so I would give you even more of an update, but I couldn't take his phone call.
Now, you could have done what Dan Bishop did, put him on the phone, hold him up, and it wouldn't have been Donald Trump, but it would have been McCrae Dallas. Come on, Nick.
As Mike knows the hard way, McCrae doesn't really like microphones. He doesn't like being but so McCrae Dallas was in court today in state court in Wake County on his state criminal charges. He's charged with various crimes that amount to election fraud, both for the 2016 election and 2018 election. And he maintains that he did not break the law, that he's done nothing wrong, to the point where he pleaded not guilty today and rejected a plea deal from prosecutors today. So this was the first time he'd been in court in more than 2 years. And so for people, there are a lot of folks who are convinced that McCrae did something illegal and broke the law, and maybe he did, but it's important to remember he's not had a day in court yet, and that has not been before a jury. And so we still don't know. That's one of the big outstanding questions. Separately, he pleaded guilty this summer to federal charges related to unemployment, Social Security disability fraud, for essentially failing to report the income he made from the Mark Harris campaign in the 2018 election while he was drawing disability benefits. And so he is scheduled to report to prison next month, although he's had some health challenges in the last couple months. And so we'll see what happens with that.
And Nick, something that you just said, I want to make sure that our viewers understand. So really this whole question, we ended up with a special election out of this, with which Dan Bishop won, but the actual question of ballot harvesting, et cetera, hasn't been officially adjudicated in court.
No, it's not been to court. And you know, I'm sure the pandemic played some role in that, you might say, but you know, McRae maintains his innocence and is so sure that he's innocent that he's rejecting any kind of plea offer and plea deal and will not plead. That could always change. But you know, as of today, he wouldn't plead, and he's convinced that he's not done anything wrong. And so, you know, in this country, you're innocent until proven guilty, at least in the court of law. And so we'll see what happens. As of today, his trial set to begin in late August of this coming year.
So clearly, this story far, far from over. Now, Michael, you actually covered the Dan McCready campaign. Where is Dan McCready today?
He still lives here in Charlotte. He took a long time off in 2020. I think he and his family went to Montana for a while, spent a lot of time out there, and he's back. He still runs his business, and he's trying to figure out, I think, where he wants to be in politics, if he wants to be in politics again. I know he was picking away at his own book. He has some thoughts about the election cycle that you know, and the response from Democratic leaders actually at the time, and he's thought about trying to put them down into a book too. So
interesting.
But he's still here, not running for anything that I know of yet.
And what about Mark Harris and his son? We know, Nick, you said that John Harris is still an attorney working in a government office. I think you said Eastern District U.S. Attorney's Office?
Yep. That's what John's doing, still working at the Eastern District U.S. Attorney's Office. Mark Harris has taken a pastorship of a Baptist church in Mooresville up in Lake Norman area. But still very active in politics. I'm going to screw this up. I think he's doing work with the Family Research Council, but I might be a different organization. But anyway, so he's involved very much still in politics and elections and races, and still very clearly keeps his finger on the pulse of those kinds of things. Yeah.
So what do you, having gone through all of this information and knowing the players involved in this story, what do you think is like the big unanswered question here, or something that you weren't satisfied with once you finished the book, that you didn't know or couldn't completely figure out? Is there anything that stands out to you, either one of you, about that?
I think the biggest issue that still sort of bothers me is that after 2016, the State Board of Elections and its investigators sent a big packet to the U.S. Attorney of the Eastern District and asked to have some investigation done into Bladen County elections. And nothing happened with it. It just sat there. And so the 2018 election happened because nothing happened with that 2016 packet. And that still bothers, I think, Nick. I know that bothers Nick, because it's not a question of, like, when we talk about election fraud and voter fraud, you know, I don't know that we should necessarily be concerned with, you know, the individual cases here and there, one or two in North Carolina, one or two in California, one or two. What you want to happen is for systems to work, and for systems to work to prevent stuff like this. And in this case, the system failed the people of Bladen County. It failed Mark Harris and Dan McCready. It failed, you know, it failed everybody who was voting in that 2018 election, because the warnings were there and nobody did anything with it from 2016.
And more importantly, and more tragically, I don't know that anything that's happened since the 2018 election is going to systemically fix the problems that led to the 2018 election. Kind of like Mike just alluded to, what happened in 2018 didn't happen in a vacuum. It was a collision of a lot of different forces and a lot of different issues and problems that bubbled up. You read in our book, bubbled up for the last 150 years since Reconstruction. But, you know, charging McCrae Dowless and his folks with election-related crimes, okay, fine. That certainly sends a message. But we also know, and as I've talked about a little bit, there was at least one other, and if not several other organizations also operating, you know, in the gray lines of election law, in the gray area of election law in Bladen County. You know, Josh Lawson, who spent years as the general counsel of the North Carolina State Board of Elections, he's a figure that emerges in the book. He took some notes one day in a meeting with prosecutors and he was a meticulous note taker, where he wrote 3 times, both sides, both sides, both sides. And I've not seen anything to systemically stop what is happening as a just matter of course in southeastern North Carolina. And I don't know that we'll ever see that. And until something is done to address the system, we're going to see something like this again in the future.
I think that's a perfect opportunity actually to bring Dr. Andy Jackson back into this conversation. Andy is the director of the Civitas Center for Public Integrity, housed here at the John Locke Foundation. And Andy, I know as you, first of all, you've taken a look at the book and you've been listening to this conversation, and I have a feeling that the comments about this being a systemic problem well outside of Bladen County really rings true to you. You watch the entire state.
I do, and there's we've seen this problem. Former executive director of State Board of Elections, Gary Bartlett, had said that he had referred over a half dozen cases to state and federal prosecutors and the SBI, the State Bureau of Investigation, and nothing came of those. And a couple of those include a couple of pretty blatant examples where, for example, in Swain County out west, a incumbent member of the county commissions, there was evidence that and testimony that he had been collecting ballots, taking possession of non-relatives' ballots. Perhaps in a more egregious example, this was about a decade ago, was in Yancey County, where we had allegations of illegal ballot handling by members of the sheriff's department during the sheriff's election, and also pressure on people who had cases coming up before court where deputies would essentially offer a reduced charge in exchange for voting for their sheriff's candidate. And we've had some cases where the system has worked. We had an overturned election in Robeson County where they had illegally registered people during early voting. In Hope County after 2016, a couple of people were convicted after harvesting ballots from people in an assisted living facility. So we do have a lot of problems, and sometimes they get caught, but a lot of times they don't. And I think especially if you're living in a poor part of the state, you're going to take those odds. If you think you can make some quick money and your chances of being A, caught, and B, prosecuted are that low, it seems like a pretty good bet.
I'm really glad you said that, Andy, and I don't mind jumping in, but that's like a huge part of our book. Like it's how does election fraud happen? Desperation helps it happen, right? If you're not making any money, if this is the best job in town for that year, you're going to take that job. I mean, that's so I do think that part of what we should worry about is on a much larger scale is forgetting about places like Bladen County, Hope County, Robeson County, things like that. Places that are sort of in the shadows of Raleigh and Charlotte. These are the places that this happens. And it happens because the median household income is $30,000 a year. People are leaving in droves, but here along comes a job where you can make $150 a day. Sure, I'll take it, and I think that's part of the larger thing we have to figure out is investment in these communities too.
Is it about absentee ballots? Is this really the area that is ripe for shenanigans and trying to alter perhaps the outcome of an election? Or is it still broader than that?
I mean, I think absentee ballots, just by their nature, present an opportunity for shenanigans, right? I like that word. I think it's a good description of this. It's all encompassing. And so certainly there are opportunities for that, but that doesn't make them in and of themselves insecure, right? I mean, that's how a lot of people vote in North Carolina, especially in rural areas. But, you've also heard throughout the years tale and allegations of what they call hauling people to the polls and being given, I've heard in this is just, over the decades, Goldsboro, it's hush puppies and chicken gravy. In some places, it's a McDonald's gift card or coupon and, whatever, take your pick. I think in Bladen County, the old rumors that it was a shot of liquor, to go vote for whoever they want you to go vote for. And that doesn't involve an absentee ballot. That involves going to the polls. But that's also very difficult. I've not known of any hauling operation like that to be proven to be happening and illegal. But, I think absentee ballots present a unique set of opportunities for shenanigans, but don't by themselves mean they're going to be shenanigans any more than taking people to the polls means they're going to be shenanigans.
So, Michael, should North Carolinians feel like that their vote counts and that our election system in this state is safe and secure? Or should people be worried about stuff like this?
Yeah, I think people should. I think people should be fairly convinced that their vote counts. Yes, I do think that some of these things are outliers, but the point of our book is to show how it happens on a larger scale. And I think that's what we have to worry about, is that the places where this is happening as operations, not just individual cases, I think that that's the fear, is because that's what we want to prevent. I mean, absentee ballots, certainly help a lot of people. They help a lot of people in Bladen County. 2018, think about this, 2018, Hurricane Florence came and dumped 20 some inches of rain, flooded out Bladenboro. People couldn't get out of their driveways for months. Yeah, sometimes maybe, if you're out of work and you're tired and you've been cleaning up your house, yeah, an absentee ballot is much easier than driving all the way to Elizabethtown or Bladenboro or something like that if you're living out in the country. So, I mean, absentee ballots absolutely have a lot of value, but we should always be working to see what we've done wrong and see the errors we've made. And I think in this case, we show, I hope, the errors that were made along the way.
I was struck by one particular passage in the book, Michael and Nick, that you wrote that essentially said we shouldn't dismiss this story as an outlier, and you call it an American disease. How so?
It's a precursor, I think we said. And what we mean by that, and I think it goes back to what I said after Andy talked, is going back to what Andy said. What we mean by that is campaigns continue to get richer, and people in these places continue to get poor. So as campaigns continue to get richer and have more money and more resources to pour into Bladen County, they are more likely to become the best employer of that fall in town. And so that is the disease. I feel like if we have continued to create this distance between how much money candidates have, even in just small congressional races, essentially coming to town with $10 million total between the two campaigns, that's a whole lot of money to people in Bladen County. It may not be a blink to some people in Charlotte, but it's a whole lot of money in Bladen County.
Well, let's think about, desperation, a lot of campaign money. Let's throw in there the increasing divisiveness, both between political parties, but also between urban and rural, and that tension that continues to deepen. And that further, and that certainly was at play in the 9th Congressional District in 2018, and that certainly hasn't gotten any better since then. That's a whole nother piece of it.
Interesting. The whole question, the broader question of election integrity and all that, of course, Andy's center here at Locke deals with all that, looking at laws, rules, regulations, things like that. But the State Board of Elections, I mean, they're obviously, concerned about public trust, et cetera. In fact, they actually just today, I'm sure on their Twitter feed, they've got a hashtag going of Mythbuster Monday. And here's what they tweeted today. Reality, there is no evidence of any manipulation of NC election systems. Security precautions are in place, and audits and recounts demonstrate accurate results. Rumor, the election management system is easily manipulated. So clearly they want to make sure the public feels that there's confidence. And I'd love to get your reaction on that. They say the rumor is the election management system is easily manipulated, essentially that's not true. Do you all agree with that?
Well, I think it's important to look at what we see here in the book. The folks at the State Board of Elections did all they could to try to wave the big red flag that there were issues in Bladen County, right? And just as they had tried to wave the big red flag that there were issues in all those counties that Andy ticked off, right? I mean, across multiple directors. And I think the systemic questions, when we bring up questions about the system, we really are questioning the system outside of the control of the Board of Elections. I mean, he's not there anymore, but Josh Lawson did yeoman's work and Kim Strack did yeoman's work trying to get people's attention on this, on what was happening specifically in Bladen County before the 2018 race, and then did yeoman's work trying to investigate to the extent they could what happened, following the election. And so, yes, do I feel confident that the hardworking people at the staff of the State Board of Elections are doing all they can to keep our elections secure? Absolutely. Does it require more than just the staff of the state and county Board of Elections to be on guard? Also, yes. And so, but I'm sure that when the State Board releases their vote counts, it is true and accurate to the best of their ability.
Michael, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I think it just continues to be true to get it right when you have allegations of election fraud and voter fraud. It's important to get it right and not necessarily, not spread rumors about things where you may not know. I mean, even though Nick just spotted off all the rumors we've heard in Eastern North Carolina of hauling voters for $5 McDonald's cards. I mean, you hear that all the time, over and over there. So the important thing, I think, is to verify and to get it right, because it's never the elections are totally insecure, or the elections are completely secure and you can't possibly break through this system. I mean, I think that there's somewhere in the like most things in life, it's somewhere in the middle. I think we do have a lot of our larger issues to worry about that can help stop creating environments where this could even just happen. And I think that's the key to me, is the people of Bladen County lost trust in elections a long time ago. A lot of people there. And we're not talking about Democrats or Republicans. We're talking about people on both sides. I mean, if I stood in that parking lot of that the first day I went to Bladen County, I just went to a grocery store and stood in the parking lot and asked people questions. And every single person said, "Where y'all been?" Or what do you mean? You're just asking, what are you coming here now for? This has been going on for years. They're all crooked, And the point is, whether they were crooked or not, whether they are all crooked or not, that's what a lot of people in Bladen County believed. And when you have that erosion of trust, that's what the disease is. That's what is sort of, quote, rotten. We have the word rotten in the book a lot. That's what's rotten is, and it can spread. And so we have to do things to restore that trust before it continues to get worse.
There's so much in this book that is just fascinating. Again, the character development, you guys did, I think, just a great job of kind of introducing the reader to who these people are beyond a caricature, and what their relationships were and perhaps their motivations. It's a really interesting read. After you've talked with all these people and done all of this research, what really is it, Nick, that you want people to understand about what occurred in Bladen County and the trial to come next August?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I want people to walk away from the book is that the people at the center of this book are also human. They're human, even though you can appear otherwise when when you see a name on the news all the time. And what we're talking about in the book, this isn't a book about the 9th Congressional District. It's not a book about an election. It's a book about people and about a place, the place being Bladen County, which is, I think, a character in and of itself in the book. And we're talking about humans who are flawed and gifted and complicated, and it's the story of humans that led to what happened in 2018. And it's important to understand the people in order to understand what happened.
Michael, your final thoughts on what you would like people to know about this book and why you co-wrote it?
I hope, my hope is that people in Bladen County will read it and see it as us holding a mirror up to them and showing all the parts they like and don't like about themselves. And I hope that they recognize and say, like, well, I don't like this. This is fair and accurate. We took a lot of steps to ensure accuracy. We had a third-party person transcribe all of our tape. We had we took all these steps to ensure that we were telling as true a story as we could. And what I really hope is that they see it and say, that is us. and we have some things to work on. The folks outside of Bladen County who read it, I hope that they come to have a new appreciation for people in rural North Carolina and places like Bladen County, and to understand that the issues we fight about here in Charlotte may not be similar to those there, but it means we are all one, like we are all connected in some way to making sure that this thing called a democracy continues, and we all have to work together to make it happen.
The book is called The Vote Collectors, the true story of the scamsters, politicians, and preachers behind the nation's greatest electoral fraud. It's been written by our guests today, Michael Graff and Nick Oxner. And Nick, I think you actually have the book hot off the press. You want to show it to everybody there?
Here it is. Yes, we just got them on Wednesday of last week, so they exist in the world.
They do indeed. And in fact, I would encourage you to read this. It really is a good read, so well written, and just a fascinating story. And as they mentioned, not just about the actual facts about what happened during the election there, leading to a new election in the 9th Congressional District, but about the area of our state. It's a fascinating portrayal of the people and what happened there. It really is interesting. It's called The Vote Collectors. We've got a link to it in the comments section of our Facebook page if you are watching us there, or you can go onto the Facebook page a little bit later and check it out there. And of course, any place that you buy your books, no matter what the format is, you can find The Vote Collectors. It is available now. Gentlemen, it's been great to have you both with us. Thank you so much, Nick Oxner and Michael Graff. And also thank you to my colleague, Andy Jackson, who watches election integrity issues here for the Locke Foundation. Thank you so much, guys. Have a great Thanksgiving, and congratulations on the book. We wish you the best with it.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, and happy Thanksgiving to you guys too.
And folks, thank you for watching today. Really appreciate you joining here at Shaftesbury Society once again. Just a programming note, next week we're going to be off because of Thanksgiving. Hope you have a wonderful time with your friends and family next week. We will be back with another edition on Monday, November 29th. Got another great one planned for you. Our outreach team, Becky Gray, Jordan Roberts, they're going to join us to give us an update on what's going on over at the legislature. Will we have a budget by then? That's the big question mark. So tune in with us again on November 29th. In the meantime, I'm Donna Martinez. On behalf of the entire John Locke Foundation team, thank you for watching. Have a great week and happy Thanksgiving.